In a cozy, family-style restaurant with wooden tables, checkered tablecloths, and a constant aroma of fresh coffee and homemade food. The atmosphere was warm, reflecting the hard work of Amy Wilson, the head waitress, known for her dedication and kindness. Amy moved quickly from one table to another, deftly balancing a tray full of plates and glasses. Her simple but well-pressed uniform and constant smile on her face made her a beloved figure among regular customers. Despite the evident fatigue in her eyes, Amy maintained the energy that defined her, serving everyone with an uncommon patience and gentleness. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Today we have the fresh apple pie you love. Shall I bring you a slice with your coffee?" she said while taking an order from the next table. The customer, an elderly gentleman, smiled warmly at Amy, nodding in approval. Amy knew all the customers by name, knew their preferences, and made sure to create a welcoming environment in the restaurant. In the back of the dining room, Grace Wilson, her 8-year-old daughter, was sitting at a table near the counter, engrossed in a coloring book with crayons scattered in front of her. The girl was a picture of innocence, with braided blonde hair and a curious gaze that often observed the movement around her. "Mom, look what I drew," called Grace, holding up the coloring book to show a colorful drawing of a woman dressed in a waitress uniform and a superhero cape. Amy paused for a moment, drying her hands on her apron before approaching her daughter. "Let me see that," she said with a playful smile. "You drew me as a superhero again, Grace. It's getting better every time. And this cape? Is it to help me fly faster between tables?" Grace laughed, shaking her head. "No, Mom. It's because you're already my hero. You work so hard, but you always have time for me. I just wanted everyone to see how special you are." The sincerity in the girl's words made Amy's smile tremble as a pang of emotion hit her. "Oh, my love, you know how to make your mum emotional. But you know what? You're the real hero here. I do all of this for you." Amy kissed her daughter's forehead before returning to work, but Grace's words echoed in her mind. Each step she took between the tables seemed lighter, as if the fatigue of the day had temporarily disappeared. Sarah Mitchell, Amy's best friend and fellow waitress at the restaurant, watched the scene from the counter with a smile. "Amy, you really don't stop, do you? Not even for a minute. When was the last time you took a break?" asked Sarah, while reorganizing a stack of menus. Amy let out a short laugh, picking up another tray from the kitchen. "A break? What's that again?" "I can't afford that luxury, Sarah. Grace has the science fair at school next week, and they asked for a bunch of things. I have to work double to make sure she has everything she needs. You know how it is." There was pride and determination in Amy's voice, but also a weariness she tried to hide. "I understand, but you also need to take care of yourself, Amy. It's no use working so hard if you end up getting sick," Sarah said with a concerned tone. Amy just shrugged, flashing a brief smile before moving on to another table. The restaurant was almost an extension of Amy's home. It was there that she spent most of her day, interacting with customers who were already like family. Despite the financial struggles and exhausting routine, she found joy in small things. Grace's smile, customers' compliments, and even the occasional jokes from Sarah. As the clock approached noon, the activity began to increase. Amy and Sarah took turns between the kitchen and the dining room, trying to fulfill all orders as quickly as possible. The restaurant owner, Frank Carter, watched it all from his office upstairs. He rarely came down to the dining room, preferring to manage the business from afar, but today something about his behavior seemed different. Frank slowly descended the stairs, his eyes scanning the dining room until they landed on Amy. "Amy, can I talk to you for a moment?" called Frank with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amy stopped in her tracks, balancing a tray full of glasses, and exchanged a brief glance with Sarah before following him. "Of course, Mr. Carter." "What's the matter?" she asked, trying to hide her nervousness. It was rare for Frank to call her for a private conversation, and it never seemed like a good sign. Frank crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "I've noticed you've been working very hard lately, and that's great. But we need to talk about the accounts. I've been receiving some complaints about errors in orders. I'm not saying you're responsible, but I need you to be more attentive." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying accusatory tone. Amy frowned, confused. "Mr. Carter, I always double-check orders before taking them to the tables. If there was any mistake, I can assure you it wasn't intentional. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding." Frank forced a smile, taking a step back. Of course, I'm just asking you to redouble your attention. I don't want this to become a bigger problem. Now, you can get back to work. He turned abruptly, leaving Amy with an uneasy feeling. Something wasn't right, but she didn't know exactly what. Back in the dining room, Grace called for Amy again, this time with a new drawing. "Mummy, can I stay here with you all day?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Amy laughed softly, kneeling beside her daughter. "You can stay as long as you like, my love, as long as you finish your drawings and don't eat the whole apple pie." She winked, teasing the girl, who laughed loudly. The restaurant continued to operate normally, but the day, which had begun with a sense of tranquility, was about to take a turn that no one could predict. The activity in the restaurant remained intense, with customers coming and going, the sound of cutlery clinking on plates and conversations filling the air. Amy Wilson followed her routine, smiling at customers, unaware that this would be the day that would change her life forever. Amy was adjusting the cups at the counter when she heard a call from one of the tables near the window. A middle-aged man in worn business attire and an impatient look raised his hand, waving to her with irritation. "Waitress, any chance of bringing my order today?" His voice rang out loud, catching the attention of some nearby customers. "Of course, sir, it's coming right up," Amy responded with a polite smile, though the man's tone had made her uncomfortable. She hurried to pick up the plate from the kitchen, making sure everything was in order. It was a simple order, grilled chicken with special sauce and vegetables. Amy quickly checked the plate before taking it to the table, as she did with all orders. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Here you go, sir. I hope you enjoy it," she said, as she placed the plate in front of the customer, still keeping her smile. The man mumbled something unintelligible without even looking at Amy, and began eating. Amy returned to the counter, where Sarah was waiting for her, giving her a warning look. "You don't need to tolerate that kind of thing, Amy. Those clients who think they can talk to you like that." "It's infuriating," commented Sarah, as she organized the menus again. Amy shrugged, picking up another tray. "It's part of the job, Sarah. I can't let these things affect me. I just want to finish my shift and go home with Grace." She glanced at her daughter, who was now focused on a new drawing, oblivious to what was happening around her. Minutes later, the same man began coughing violently. The loud sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, attracting stares from everyone present. Amy was the first to notice and rushed over to him. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, concerned, as the man placed his hands on his chest, struggling to breathe. His eyes were wide open and the color of his face was starting to change. Something in that sauce," he managed to say before falling from his chair, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Panic spread through the restaurant. Customers stood up, some screaming for help, while others simply watched, paralyzed. "Someone call an ambulance," shouted Amy, kneeling beside the man. She tried to revive him, but he remained unconscious. Sarah quickly grabbed the phone, calling the paramedics, while Grace watched the scene with tear-filled eyes, clutching her sketchbook tightly. The restaurant owner, Frank Carter, emerged from the kitchen at that moment, wearing a grave expression. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking at the man on the floor. Amy tried to explain, but her voice was trembling. "He was eating the dish I served and started feeling unwell." "I don't know what happened, Frank. He just passed out." Frank looked at her for a moment, as if analyzing every word spoken. "You served the dish, Amy? Are you sure there was no error in the kitchen? No wrong ingredient?" His tone was one of superficial concern, but Amy sensed something strange in his gaze. "I checked the dish before bringing it to the table. There was nothing wrong." "I don't understand how this happened," Amy replied, feeling a knot forming in her throat. The paramedics arrived soon after, rushing to attend to the man on the floor. They worked quickly, but one of their expressions changed, revealing that something was very wrong. "He's not responding. We need to get him to the hospital immediately," said one of the paramedics as they prepared the stretcher. They took the customer outside, leaving the restaurant enveloped in an uncomfortable silence. Amy stood still, feeling helpless, as Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is serious, Amy. You need to tell me exactly what happened," he said, his tone sounding more accusatory than concerned. Amy shook her head, trying to remain calm. "I already told you, Frank. I took the dish straight from the kitchen. There was nothing wrong." Frank sighed and stepped away. "We'll sort this out, but I need you to be available to answer any questions in case the police come to investigate." He returned to the kitchen, but before entering he looked around to make sure no one was following him. Inside, he opened a small locked drawer, taking out a vial with a transparent liquid. He looked at the label for a moment, before placing it on a shelf near the preparation area. "That should be enough," Frank muttered to himself with a cold smile. He knew the suspicions would fall on Amy, and that was exactly what he wanted. Amy was dedicated and naive, the perfect scapegoat to cover up his own mistakes. Meanwhile, in the dining room, Amy tried to calm Grace, who was still in shock. "Mummy, will he be okay? Why did this happen?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Amy held her daughter in her arms, not knowing what to answer. "I don't know, my love, but everything will be all right, I promise." Sarah, who was standing beside them, gave Amy a worried look. "Are you sure there was nothing strange in the kitchen today? Maybe something slipped by without you noticing?" she asked, lowering her voice so no one else could hear. "I checked everything, Sarah. I always do." "There was nothing out of the ordinary," Amy replied firmly, but her mind was filled with doubts. She trusted the work she did, but Frank's earlier look and the way he handled the situation was starting to unsettle her. Shortly after, the police arrived at the restaurant asking to speak with Amy and Frank. As Amy explained what had happened, Frank maintained a calm and cooperative demeanor, but his words were of no help. "Amy is responsible for serving the dishes, but of course we don't want to accuse anyone until we're sure. We just want to cooperate with the investigation," he said, with an expression of false concern. Amy looked at Frank, incredulous. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just served the plate they handed me," she said. But the officers took notes in silence, showing no opinion. Outside, the ambulance had already left, and customers began to leave the restaurant, whispering among themselves. Amy knew that day would change everything, but she had no idea how much worse things would get. The restaurant was quiet now. The previously occupied tables had been emptied, and the smell of fresh coffee had given way to a dense tension that hung in the air. Amy was sitting near the counter, with Grace by her side, holding her small, trembling hand. The restaurant door burst open, revealing two police officers entering with firm strides. The taller one had a serious, determined look, while the other maintained a cautious expression. Amy stood up instinctively, her heart racing while Grace watched her with wide, fearful eyes. "Mrs. Amy Wilson?" called the taller officer. The firm, neutral voice seemed to echo through the empty hall. Amy took a deep breath and nodded, feeling the ground slip from under her feet. "Yes, that's me." The officer stepped forward, holding a pair of handcuffs. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm sorry to inform you, but you're being arrested on suspicion of homicide. The customer you served today has passed away, and evidence points to poisoning in the plate delivered by you." Grace let out a small cry of shock, clutching her mother's arm. "Mom, what is he saying? You didn't do anything wrong. Why are they saying that?" The girl's voice trembled and tears began to stream down her face. Amy fell to her knees, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "Grace, listen to me. This is a big mistake. I didn't do anything wrong and I'll prove it. I want you to stay with Sarah until everything is resolved, okay? I love you more than anything, my love." Her voice faltered at the end, but she tried to stay calm, even as despair grew in her chest. "Mom, please don't go. I don't want them to take you," Grace cried as the officers approached. Sarah ran to the girl, taking her in her arms and trying to calm her. "Grace, your mum needs to sort this out. We'll be okay, I promise." The officer placed the handcuffs on Amy as she struggled to hold back her tears. She looked at her daughter one last time before being led out of the restaurant. Grace, crying and squirming in Sarah's arms, screamed for her mother, but the door closed with a cold click separating the two. In the police car, Amy let the tears flow freely. The image of Grace crying would be etched in her mind forever. She knew she needed to fight, not just for her innocence, but for the daughter she had left behind on that terrible night. Later, the courtroom was packed. People crowded the wooden benches, whispering among themselves as they cast curious glances at the woman seated at the defense table. Amy Wilson, with hunched shoulders and trembling hands, tried to remain calm, but the weight of the accusations crushed her. Her mind swirled around Grace, the last time she saw her daughter, and how she had arrived at this moment. She was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. On the other side of the room, the prosecutor, a confident man with an incisive speech, organized a stack of documents on the table. He looked at the judge, who signaled for him to begin. "Your Honor, members of the jury, the case we have here today is clear and undeniable. The defendant, Amy Wilson, was directly responsible for the poisoning that took the life of a customer at the restaurant where she worked. And to prove this, we will present evidence that leaves no doubt." Amy looked at her lawyer, a hastily assigned public defender who seemed as nervous as she was. He whispered, "Stay calm. We'll challenge every piece of evidence presented." But the words sounded hollow, lacking real conviction. Amy just nodded, not knowing if she believed it. The prosecutor approached one of the officers who had investigated the case and began the interrogation. "Officer, could you describe what was found at the restaurant during the investigation?" he asked in a calculated tone. The officer, with a rigid posture, responded, "Yes, sir. During the search of the restaurant's kitchen, we found a vial containing a substance identified as toxic. It was on a shelf near the food preparation area. Furthermore, in a preliminary examination, traces of this substance were found on the victim's plate." Amy felt her stomach turn. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered to her lawyer, who tried to calm her with a gesture. The prosecutor, however, ignored the discomfort at the defense table and proceeded. "Your Honor, I would like to present the vial as Exhibit 1, said the prosecutor, handing the item to the judge. The small container, now in a sealed plastic bag, seemed mundane, but it carried the weight of a devastating accusation. The prosecutor turned back to the officer. "And who had access to that area of the kitchen?" "All employees did, but the defendant was responsible for serving the plates to the table," the officer replied. The statement, though technically true, seemed to place all the blame squarely on Amy. The defense attorney rose hesitantly. "Officer, I'd like to ask, are there records of who handled the plate before it was served?" The officer responded firmly, "There are no direct records, but the testimony of restaurant owner Frank Carter indicates that the defendant was the only one responsible for delivering the plate to the victim." Frank's name made Amy raise her gaze for the first time during the trial. She could not believe he had actually incriminated her in that way. Frank was seated in the witness area with an impassive expression. He did not even look at Amy, focusing only on the prosecutor. "Excellence," the prosecutor continued, "I would also like to call Mr. Frank Carter to testify about the defendant's behavior on the day of the incident." Frank rose and walked to the witness stand. His gait was slow, calculated, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Mr. Carter, what can you tell us about Mrs. Amy Wilson as an employee at your restaurant?" the prosecutor asked. Frank cleared his throat before answering with a tone of false concern. "Amy has always been a dedicated employee, but recently I noticed that she seemed distracted. She even made small mistakes, and I tried to warn her. On the day of the incident, I remember seeing her near the preparation area shortly before the plate was served." Amy felt a chill down her spine. "That's a lie," she exclaimed, but was interrupted by the judge banging his gavel. "Order in the court." He shot Amy a stern look before allowing Frank to continue. "As the owner of the restaurant, my only interest is in the safety of the customers," Frank said in an almost rehearsed tone. "I could never imagine something like this happening, but unfortunately all the evidence points to Amy." The prosecutor thanked Frank and turned to the jury. "Members of the jury, you have heard what was said. There is a logical sequence here. The toxic substance was found in the kitchen, on the plate served by the defendant, and her own employer confirmed that she was near the preparation area. There is no doubt about her guilt." Amy was stunned. Frank's words hit her like blows, each one more painful than the last. She looked at her lawyer, hoping he would do something, but he seemed lost, flipping through papers without knowing where to begin. That night, the court was temporarily adjourned, but Amy knew that the weight of the false evidence had already planted doubt in the jurors' minds. As she was led back to her cell, the only thing she could think about was Grace. "I need to get out of here. I need to protect my daughter," she muttered to herself as the prison doors closed behind her. The courtroom was silent. All eyes were fixed on Amy Wilson, who remained seated in the defendant's chair with trembling hands on her knees. The weight of the accusations was suffocating, and the carefully presented false evidence had built a narrative that was almost impossible to deconstruct. Judge Henderson entered the room with firm steps, and the sound of the gavel echoed through the chamber. "Court is in session. We will proceed with the reading of the verdict," announced the judge. Amy felt her heart beating so hard that it seemed to echo in her ears. She looked at her lawyer, who avoided meeting her gaze, unable to offer any assurance of hope. Grace was sitting in the front row next to Sarah, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. The girl watched her mother with teary eyes, not fully understanding what was about to happen. The jury's spokesperson, a middle-aged man with a somber expression, rose and adjusted his glasses before speaking. After deliberation, the jury has reached a unanimous verdict. Considering the evidence presented and the testimonies of the witnesses, we find the defendant, Amy Wilson, guilty of premeditated homicide. The sentence hit Amy like a blow. Her body froze for a moment as the meaning of the spokesperson's words sank into her mind. Grace let out a loud sob, and Sarah immediately pulled her into a tight embrace, trying to shield her from the impact of that devastating sentence. "Your Honor," the jury spokesperson continued, "we recommend the maximum penalty allowed by law given the gravity of the crime and the cruelty involved, the death penalty." Amy finally found the strength to speak, her voice trembling and choked. "No, please, this is a mistake. I'm innocent. I didn't do any of that," she cried as tears streamed freely down her face. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order in the courtroom, but chaos had already ensued. The murmur of the audience grew louder, and Grace cried more and more, calling for her mother. "Mommy, please, no, I want to go with you. It's not fair." The girl tried to stand up, but Sarah held her firmly, struggling against her own tears. Amy tried to turn to look at Grace, but the guards were already at her side, grabbing her arms and leading her out of the courtroom. "Grace, I love you. I'll prove my innocence. Don't give up on me," Amy shouted as she was forcibly led away by the guards. The courtroom doors closed behind her, muffling her screams and leaving Grace crying in Sarah's arms. Outside, Amy was placed in an armored car, bound for the maximum security prison where she would await her execution. She pressed her forehead against the vehicle's window, watching the courthouse recede as Grace's cries echoed in her mind. The guilt and despair were overwhelming, but amidst the pain, a spark of determination began to flicker. "I won't let them end my life like this. Grace needs me. I'll fight," she muttered to herself, clenching her fists. Inside the courtroom, Sarah struggled to console Grace, but the girl was inconsolable. "She didn't do it, Sarah. I know she didn't." "Why are they saying those things about her?" Grace asked, her voice full of tears. Sarah had no answers, but she held the girl tightly and whispered, "I believe your mother, Grace. We'll find the truth, I promise." The impact of the sentence spread rapidly. The media reported the case with sensational headlines: "Waitress sentenced to death for poisoning," and "Mother of 8-year-old girl sentenced to execution." Amy's image being escorted out of the courtroom was on every screen, and comments divided public opinion. Some considered her a cold-blooded killer, while others questioned the inconsistencies of the case. In prison, Amy was taken to an isolated cell where she would have time to reflect on her sentence. But instead of surrendering to despair, she clung to the image of Grace. Sitting on the thin mattress with her eyes fixed on the small window high up on the wall, she began to plan. "They may have condemned me, but it's not over yet. I'll find a way to prove my innocence." "Grace won't grow up without her mother," she whispered to herself, hugging her own legs. Outside, Sarah began to recall the last days before the tragedy. Something didn't make sense. Amy was the most careful and dedicated person she knew. She always checked the dishes, never made mistakes. Frank Carter, on the other hand, seemed to be too calm for someone who should be devastated by what happened at his restaurant. His expression in court, that almost rehearsed calm, made something inside Sarah stir. As Grace slept on her lap, exhausted from crying so much, Sarah picked up the phone and started taking notes. "I'm going to find out what happened that day. For Amy. For Grace. This isn't over," she thought, her gaze fixed on Grace's sketchbook, which now rested on the table. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows along the streets as Grace and Sarah passed in front of the restaurant where it all began. Grace clutched her sketchbook tightly against her chest, staring intently at the facade of the place that once seemed so familiar and now brought only sadness and doubt. Sarah stopped for a moment, trying to pull Grace along to keep walking, but the girl didn't move. "Grace, we need to go home. You're tired and it's not good to stay here. Let's go." Sarah's voice was gentle, but carried an urgency that the girl ignored. "I want to see something," Grace replied, her voice low but determined. Her eyes were fixed on the inside of the restaurant, visible through the large glass windows. The place was empty, except for a familiar figure, Frank Carter, the restaurant owner. He was at the counter, gesturing exaggeratedly as he spoke on the phone. "Grace, he can't see us here." "Let's go," Sarah insisted, looking around to make sure no one noticed them. But Grace pulled her arm, pointing to the window. "Look at him, Sarah. He's nervous. I've never seen Mr. Carter like this." Sarah followed the girl's gaze. Frank's face was furrowed, holding the phone in one hand while quickly rummaging through a drawer with the other. The movement seemed hurried and full of anxiety. He took something out of the drawer and put it in an envelope, looking over his shoulder as if checking if anyone was watching him. "What could he be doing?" Grace muttered, almost to herself. There was something unsettling about Frank's behavior. He who always seemed so controlled now seemed scared. Sarah watched closely, trying to understand what was happening. "I don't know, Grace, but it's strange for him to be here alone at this hour. It's not like he's running the restaurant. It looks more like he's hiding something," Sarah said in a grave voice. Suddenly, Frank hung up the phone and started walking towards the back exit, clutching the envelope tightly. Grace and Sarah quickly crouched behind a parked car, trying not to be seen. Sarah's heart was racing, but she knew she needed to stay calm, especially because of Grace. "Sarah, do you think he has something to do with what happened to Mom's dish?" Grace asked, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Sarah hesitated, but there was something inside her that was already starting to connect the dots. "I don't know, Grace, but I think we need to find out. Your mom needs us, and this might be important," Sarah replied as they watched Frank disappear into the darkness of the side street. The seed of doubt was planted, and Grace knew it couldn't be ignored. The restaurant was strangely quiet that morning. The usual sounds of clinking plates and lively conversations had given way to a tense atmosphere. Sarah, in an impeccable apron and a pensive expression, slowly wiped down the counter, her mind wandering to recent events. Amy's conviction had left her uneasy, and something about the case didn't seem right. Sarah looked over at the table where Amy always started her shift, organizing the notepad and aligning the cutlery as she did every day. It seemed like an automatic gesture, but Amy's absence made everything surreal. "She wouldn't do that," Sarah muttered to herself as she straightened the menus on the counter. Amy was always careful, maybe too careful. How can they believe she would poison someone? Frank Carter entered the dining room from the kitchen, his steps quick and his expression tense. He seemed more nervous than usual, his sweaty face betraying some kind of restlessness. "Sarah, make sure everything is ready for the afternoon shift, and don't forget to review the special orders. I don't want any more problems," he said, almost spitting out the words before disappearing back into his office. Sarah frowned, watching the door close behind him. Ever since the day of the incident, Frank had been acting differently. He was always on the phone, closed doors for private conversations, and rarely stopped in the dining room like he used to. It was as if he was trying to avoid any prolonged interaction with the staff. As Sarah moved to the prep area, she noticed a drawer in the kitchen slightly ajar. Something was glinting inside. She looked around, making sure no one was nearby, and carefully pulled the drawer open. Inside was a small empty vial with a label that appeared to have been partially removed. Sarah picked it up, examining it closely as her heart began to race. The object seemed harmless, but there was something about it that stirred unease. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Frank's voice echoed through the kitchen, making her almost drop the vial. She quickly put it back in the drawer and closed it, trying to appear calm. "Nothing, Mr. Carter. I was just checking the silverware stock," she replied, pretending to tidy a stack of plates nearby. Frank looked at her suspiciously before giving a half smile. "Good. Get back to work then," he said before hurrying out of the kitchen. Sarah waited until she was sure she was alone again before opening the drawer. The vial was still there, but now she was certain she needed to investigate further. Something about Frank's behavior, coupled with that strange object, seemed too wrong to ignore. Throughout the day, Sarah began to notice small details that had gone unnoticed before. Frank always left the diner during peak hours, something that was unusual considering how proud he was of being a present owner. Furthermore, He avoided conversations about Amy's case and quickly changed the subject whenever someone mentioned the incident. At the end of her shift, Sarah walked up to Frank's office, determined to find out more. She knocked on the door but received no answer. When she turned the knob, she found the door was locked. This was strange, as Frank rarely locked the office during business hours. Why is he hiding so much? She thought, returning to the diner. Before leaving, Sarah took out her phone and began to jot down everything she had noticed. The vial in the drawer, Frank's evasive behaviors, and the mysterious phone meetings. This is no coincidence, she said to herself. Frank knows something, and I'm going to find out what it is. Amy doesn't deserve this. The restaurant began to empty out in the late afternoon. The last customers bid farewell, leaving behind the sound of chairs being dragged and the ambient music that filled the space. Sarah, with a dishcloth in hand, was making the final adjustments to the tables, but her attention was completely focused on Frank Carter. He was at the counter, holding his phone, and seemed more restless than ever. Frank spoke on the phone in a low tone, but his expressions betrayed him. He frowned, gestured exaggeratedly, and looked around constantly, as if worried about being overheard. Sarah paused for a moment, pretending to clean a nearby table, and tried to catch fragments of the conversation. No, I already told you I'm taking care of it. Yes, the money will show up. I just need a few more days. I know, but I'm doing everything I can, Frank said in a muffled voice, but loud enough for Sarah to grasp the context. He seemed to be discussing something urgent, and the mention of money made Sarah narrow her eyes. When Frank finally hung up the phone, he headed towards the kitchen, leaving his cell phone on the counter for a few seconds. Sarah looked around, making sure they were alone, and then approached the phone. She had no intention of snooping, but a notification on the screen caught her attention. It was a text message. Carter, we're running out of patience. Pay up by the end of the month, or you know what happens. Sarah read the message with her heart pounding. That confirmed her suspicions that Frank was involved in something much darker. Before she could fully process it, Frank returned to the counter, grabbing his phone and pocketing it. Sarah, you're still here. I thought you'd finished your shift already, he said, his tone slightly suspicious. Sarah hid her nervousness with a forced smile. Oh, just finishing up, tidying things. I was cleaning over there, she replied, pointing to the tables. Frank seemed to relax a little and gave a nod before disappearing again towards his office. Sarah stood still for a few seconds, trying to organize her thoughts. Frank was clearly under pressure, but what did that have to do with Amy? Was it possible he was using Amy's conviction as a distraction from his own problems? Determined to find out more, Sarah waited until Frank left the restaurant to go home. She knew he always left promptly at 6 o'clock to take care of personal matters. As soon as he was gone, Sarah went to his office. The door, as expected, was locked, but she knew where Frank kept the spare key. He had a habit of hiding a copy under the counter, and Sarah quickly found it. Upon opening the office door, Sarah felt a chill down her spine. The room was small, with a desk cluttered with papers and a shelf full of disorganized folders. She began to quickly rummage through, knowing she didn't have much time. In one of the desk drawers, Sarah found an envelope full of documents. Most seemed related to the restaurant, but among them was something that caught her eye: a casino receipt. Frank's name was printed at the top, along with an exorbitant amount noted in red. Accumulated debt, $50,000, the document read. Sarah stood still for a moment, trying to process what that meant. As she flipped through the envelope, she found more receipts and promissory notes signed by Frank. There were collection notices, handwritten threats, and even a note that said, "If you don't pay, someone will suffer the consequences." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Frank wasn't just in financial trouble. He was clearly involved with dangerous people. Suddenly, a sound from the door made Sarah freeze. She quickly put the documents back in the envelope and closed the drawer. Her heart was pounding as she heard footsteps approaching. But upon looking through the crack of the door, she realized it was just the wind swaying one of the chairs near the diner. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, but knew she needed to get out of there before she was caught. Back in the diner, she sat down for a moment to organize her thoughts. Frank was clearly hiding more than Sarah had imagined. The debts, the evasive behaviors, the suspicious conversations. Everything was starting to fit together. Sarah remembered Amy's trial, how Frank seemed willing to pin all the blame on her without hesitation, and now, with this new information, Sarah was certain Frank was using Amy as a scapegoat to cover up his own problems. "That explains everything," she muttered to herself. "If he needed money, maybe he made some deal or something worse. But why Amy? Why involve someone who had nothing to do with it?" The questions piled up in Sarah's mind, but one thing was certain: she could no longer stand idly by. Before leaving the restaurant, Sarah took a photo of the casino receipt with her phone. She knew she couldn't confront Frank directly, at least not yet. But now she had concrete evidence, and that was a start. Amy was unjustly imprisoned, and Sarah was determined to prove it, no matter what it took. The restaurant was closed, and the dimmed lights cast shadows over the perfectly arranged tables. Sarah sat in her kitchen, the envelope of documents she had found in Frank's office spread out before her. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of her own racing thoughts. She held the phone in her hands, looking at the photo she had taken of the casino receipt. The $50,000 debt was clear and unambiguous, as were the threats accompanying the other promissory notes. "This is no coincidence," Sarah murmured, running her fingers over the paper. Everything pointed to Frank trying to cover up his own issues, but using Amy as the central piece of his lie. Sarah recalled the day of the trial, Frank's confident demeanor as he testified, and how composed he seemed while Amy struggled to defend her innocence. Now, those memories stirred a sense of outrage. She could no longer ignore the mounting evidence. "I know he's lying, and if he's willing to go that far to save his own skin, then I need to go further to prove he's guilty," she thought, her eyes fixed on the documents. The image of Amy being led to prison echoed in Sarah's mind like an open wound. The desperation in her friend's eyes and Grace's scream calling for her mother were memories she couldn't erase. "I won't let this end like this," she said aloud, as if she needed to hear her own words to strengthen her determination. Sarah decided she needed to organize a plan. She couldn't act impulsively, for she knew Frank was dangerous. The threats he received from the people he owed money showed he wouldn't hesitate to take drastic measures to protect his secrets. But she also knew that if she did nothing, Amy would never have a chance to prove her innocence. With her phone in hand, Sarah began researching the casinos listed on the receipts. She needed to understand more about Frank's connections and who might be pressuring him. At the same time, she noted down every detail that could be useful in building a solid case against him. It wasn't just about Amy, it was about Grace, who needed her mother back. When she finished organizing the information, Sarah closed the envelope and put it away in a safe place. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Despite her weariness, she felt more determined than ever. She stood up, took a deep breath and said to herself, "Tomorrow I'll start for real. Amy trusted me and I won't let her down. We'll uncover the truth." It was a peaceful morning in Sarah's small house. Grace sat on the couch holding her sketchbook while Sarah prepared breakfast. The simple routine masked the growing tension that dominated Sarah's mind, as each day she felt more pressured to uncover the truth about Amy's case. "Want more pancakes, Grace?" Sarah asked, trying to keep a light tone. The girl shook her head as she drew in her sketchbook. "No, thank you. I'm finishing my drawing of Mommy. She'll like it, won't she?" Grace said, looking up hopefully. Sarah swallowed hard, struggling to remain calm in the face of the girl's optimism. "Of course she will, dear. Your mother will love it," she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. After breakfast, Sarah took advantage of Grace being distracted with her drawings and grabbed her phone. She opened the photos of the documents she had found in Frank's office again. The $50,000 debt and handwritten threats were clear, but there was one note that intrigued her. "Find a way to pay, or you know what happens." Sarah didn't know who was behind the threat, but she needed to find out. While Grace played in the backyard, Sarah began making some discreet calls. She called an old friend who worked as an accountant and explained the situation without mentioning names. "If someone has a debt like this at a casino, what usually happens?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. On the other end of the line, the accountant sighed. "It depends on the casino, but if it's a place run by dangerous people, they don't hesitate to use intimidation. I've seen clients who lost everything, and in extreme cases, well, they make real threats," he replied. The accountant's words only reinforced Sarah's suspicions. Frank was involved with dangerous people, and he had probably used Amy as a scapegoat to divert attention. But what she couldn't understand was why the poisoned client was at the restaurant that day. That didn't seem like a coincidence. Later, while Grace watched a cartoon, Sarah took the opportunity to mentally review everything she knew so far. Frank owed a large sum of money, was under pressure, and had access to the kitchen on the day of the incident. Additionally, he clearly knew the client who died, something that became evident by Frank's discomfort every time the subject was mentioned. Grace interrupted Sarah's thoughts, holding one of her drawings. "Sarah, do you think Mommy already knows what's happening? She must be so sad," Grace said, her eyes welling up. Sarah crouched down to be at the girl's eye level and held her hands. "Your mom knows you're being so brave, Grace. And that's why we're doing all of this. We're going to help her together." After Grace fell asleep, Sarah went back to examining the photos on her phone. She noticed a detail that had gone unnoticed before. The casino receipt had the poisoned client's signature. The name was almost erased, but she managed to read enough to recognize the initials. J.M. Who was this man? And what did he have to do with Frank? She whispered to herself, jotting down the information in her notebook. Sarah knew she couldn't act alone for too long. She needed more answers, and that meant taking risks. But for now, she had to keep Grace safe and find a way to move forward without catching Frank's attention. She looked at the sleeping girl and promised herself, "I won't rest until I save your mother, no matter what I have to do." The day was sunny, but Sarah's mind was clouded with doubts and assumptions. With each new piece she found, the puzzle started to form, but crucial details were still missing to prove Amy's innocence and Frank's guilt. Determined to find answers, Sarah knew she would need to dig deep and take risks. While Grace drew on the couch, Sarah took the opportunity to review the information she had so far. The casino receipt with the initials J.M. and the promissory notes signed by Frank were strong evidence that he was involved in something obscure. But what intrigued her was the connection between Frank and the man who died poisoned. If he was a customer at the restaurant, why did it seem like Frank was hiding something about him? She muttered to herself. Sarah decided to start investigating the initials J.M. She searched online but found nothing relevant. Then she remembered something. The man who died was a regular customer at the restaurant. He always sat at the same table near the window, and Frank made sure to serve him personally. That didn't seem like a coincidence. Sarah went to her purse and grabbed her phone. She called one of the former waiters at the restaurant, who had left his job months earlier. "David, I need your help. Do you remember the customer who always sat near the window? The one who died in the incident with Amy?" David sighed on the other end of the line. "Yes, I remember him. His name was James Morgan. He came frequently, but he never seemed to be there just for the food. He and Frank seemed to have some kind of business. They would always whisper in the corner when the restaurant was empty." Sarah felt her stomach churn. "Business? Do you know what it was about?" she asked, trying to hide her nervousness. "I'm not sure, but I once heard James threatening Frank. He said something like, 'If you don't pay, I'll put an end to this once and for all.' Frank turned pale but didn't respond at the time. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to get involved," David recounted hesitantly. The information was like an explosion of light for Sarah. James Morgan wasn't just a regular customer. He had a direct relationship with Frank's debts. "Thank you, David. This helps a lot. Please don't mention this to anyone," she asked before hanging up. Now Sarah was certain the murder wasn't an accident or something random. James represented a real threat to Frank, who was willing to do anything to protect his own life. But how could she prove it? Later, Sarah returned to the restaurant with Grace, using the excuse that she needed to retrieve something she had forgotten. Frank wasn't there, but the atmosphere seemed heavier than ever. While Grace played in the dining area, Sarah went to the kitchen, where she knew Frank kept old records in a locked drawer. This time she brought a master key she had discreetly taken from a locksmith at home. Upon opening the drawer, she found a folder full of documents. Most were related to the restaurant, but amidst the papers she found a letter with James Morgan's name on the letterhead. The letter was a direct demand from James, requiring the immediate payment of $50,000. At the end of the letter, there was a clear threat. "If I don't receive the money by next week, I'll reveal everything. You know the consequences won't be good for either of us." Sarah felt her blood run cold. James knew something that could expose Frank, and instead of paying the debt, Frank decided to silence him forever. She took a picture of the letter and continued searching the drawer. She found another document, a recent purchase receipt for a chemical substance used in poisons. Frank's name was printed on the receipt, dated 2 days before the incident. That was the proof she needed. He had bought the poison and used Amy as the perfect distraction. Suddenly, she heard footsteps in the dining area. Sarah quickly put the documents back in the drawer and closed it. When she left the kitchen, she saw Grace talking to Frank, who had just arrived. He seemed suspicious. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I thought your shift was only tomorrow," he said, his tone mixing distrust and coldness. "Oh, I forgot my purse yesterday and took the opportunity to bring Grace to pick up some things," Sarah replied, trying to sound casual. Frank narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He knew something was wrong, but had no proof to confront her. When they finally left the restaurant, Sarah felt her heart racing. Each detail discovered confirmed what she feared. Frank killed James Morgan because he was cornered by debts and under threat. He used Amy as a scapegoat, knowing no one would suspect him. Now, with the evidence in hand, Sarah knew she was closer to exposing the truth. In the car, Grace looked at Sarah with curiosity. "Do you think Mommy will be back soon?" the girl asked, holding her drawing notebook. Sarah looked at her through the rearview mirror, taking a deep breath. "Yes, Grace, but we need one more thing before that. We're going to prove your mom didn't do anything wrong." Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, with papers and photos scattered in front of her. The soft light from the lamp cast shadows over the documents, while Grace, with her drawing notebook in her lap, observed everything with curiosity. It was an unusual scene for an 8-year-old girl, but Grace knew it had something to do with her mother. Sarah needed to explain, but in a way, Grace could understand. "Grace," Sarah began, her voice calm as she held one of the photos she had taken of James Morgan's letter. "You know we're trying to help your mom, right?" Grace nodded quickly, her eyes full of determination. "I know, Sarah. Mom didn't do anything wrong. Why don't people believe her?" Sarah sighed and leaned in closer to the girl. "Because someone lied, Grace. Someone made it seem like your mom is guilty, but now we have proof that she's innocent. And we need to show this proof to the right people so they understand the truth." Grace frowned, trying to process Sarah's words. "But how are we going to show that? Who's going to listen to us?" she asked, with a touch of worry in her voice. Sarah smiled slightly, admiring the girl's courage. "This is where you come in. Remember the drawing you made for your mom? The one with her as a superhero? You're going to use that to help tell the story. When we present the evidence, you're going to be the one talking about your mom, about who she really is. They need to see how this affects you, because no one is going to ignore such a smart and brave little girl." Grace's eyes widened, a little nervous at the idea. "But what if they don't believe me? What if Mr. Carter says it's a lie?" Sarah placed a gentle hand over hers. "I know it seems scary, but you won't be alone. I'll be right by your side the whole time. And when they see the evidence, they won't be able to deny it. We have the documents showing that Frank Carter owed money to the man who died. We have the receipt for the poison he bought. Say it all fits, Grace. But your voice, what you have to say about your mom, that's going to be the most important part." Grace looked down at the notebook in her lap, then back up at Sarah. "I can do this. If it's to help my mom, I can do anything." Her voice was steady despite the evident fear. Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of relief and pride. "You're amazing, you know that? Your mom would be so proud of you. We'll rehearse everything, and when it's time, we'll be ready." That night, as Grace slept, Sarah continued reviewing the documents and organizing their plan. She knew they were about to face a huge challenge, but for the first time she felt like they had a real chance of winning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow into Sarah's kitchen, where a pile of documents, photos, and notes covered almost the entire table. Sarah was hunched over the papers, rearranging everything for the 3rd time that morning. Grace, seated beside her, watched intently, trying to make sense of the complexity of what was happening. "So, Sarah, what are we going to do with all of this?" Grace asked, gesturing to the papers. She held her sketchbook close, like a kind of shield that gave her courage. Sarah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before answering. "Grace, what we have here is the evidence that shows your mom didn't do anything wrong. These documents prove that Frank Carter was lying. He blamed your mom to cover up what he did. Grace frowned, clearly still struggling to process it all. But why would he do that? He's my mom's boss. He's supposed to protect her, not hurt her. Sarah took Grace's hands, leaning in closer. You're right, sweetheart, he should have. But Frank was desperate. He owed the man who died a lot of money, and when he realized he couldn't pay it back, he decided to do something terrible. He poisoned the man and blamed your mum to get rid of the problem. Sarah spoke carefully, trying not to frighten the girl too much, but not hiding the gravity of the situation either. Grace looked at the documents again, her expression shifting from confused to determined. So we need to show this to the judge, right? If they see the evidence, they'll believe my mom? Exactly, Sarah said with a small smile. But we need to make sure it's all very clear. We have to organize everything in a way they'll understand the truth without a doubt. She began separating the papers into piles, explaining each one to Grace. Here are the debts showing Frank owed money to the man. Here are the threatening notes. And here is the receipt for buying the poison with Frank's name on it. Grace watched intently, absorbing every detail as if she were preparing for a big mission. She held one of the papers in her small hands and asked, "What if Mr. Carter tries to say it's not true?" Sarah smiled, proud of the girl's astuteness. "That's why you're going to help us. Remember your drawing? You're going to use it to tell who your mom really is. When people see you talking about her, they'll listen. No one can ignore such a brave little girl." Grace clutched her sketchbook tighter. "I'll do it, Sarah. If it helps my mom, I'll tell them everything she means to me." They spent the morning rehearsing. Sarah asked questions simulating potential doubts from the judge or prosecutor, while Grace responded with growing determination. "How do you know your mom wouldn't do something like that?" Sarah would ask. "Because she's the best mom in the world. She always does the right thing even when it's hard," Grace would reply, her voice steady. As the day wore on, Sarah felt a renewed wave of hope. Grace wasn't just brave, she was the living proof that Amy was innocent. When they reached the end of their rehearsal, Sarah hugged the girl tightly. "You were amazing, Grace. Your mum would be so proud of you." The afternoon was quiet, but Sarah's mind was buzzing. After spending the morning preparing Grace to present the evidence, Sarah knew there was still something missing. Despite having documents and receipts tying Frank Carter to the crime, she felt they needed something stronger, something that couldn't be refuted. And it was that intuition that led her back to the restaurant that afternoon. "Grace, I want you to stay in the car for a few minutes, okay? I just need to grab one more thing," Sarah said, looking at the girl in the rear-view mirror. Grace nodded, although she was visibly nervous. "Will you be long?" "I don't want anything to happen to you," the girl asked, hugging her sketchbook close. "I won't be long, I promise," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident. She opened the car door and entered the restaurant through the back entrance, which she knew was unlocked. The place was empty, with the lights off, and the silence filling the space in an unsettling way. Sarah went straight to Frank's office. Since the last time she had been there, she felt there was still something hidden in that place. She found the drawer locked again, but this time she was prepared with an improvised tool to pick locks. After a few seconds of trying, the drawer gave way, revealing the same papers she had seen before. However, this time she noticed a small USB drive at the bottom of the drawer. "This wasn't here before," Sarah muttered, picking up the device and examining it. Without wasting time, she pocketed it and started to leave the office, but something in the corner of the room caught her attention. A security camera connected to a monitor. It was an old system, but still functional. Sarah frowned, trying to remember if the camera system was active on the day of the incident. She approached the monitor and began to fiddle with the system. The recordings were saved on a hard drive connected to the camera. After a few minutes of exploring the files, Sarah found the date corresponding to the day of the crime. With her heart racing, she clicked on the video file and began watching. The recording showed the restaurant's kitchen. It was possible to see Frank entering and leaving repeatedly, rummaging through drawers and, at one point, putting something in his pocket. Sarah advanced the video to the approximate time when the victim's dish was prepared. That's when she clearly saw Frank holding a small flask, the same flask she had found in the kitchen days earlier. He opened the container, poured a substance into the sauce, and quickly mixed it before leaving the kitchen with the dish. Sarah held her breath, feeling a mixture of shock and relief. "This is it. This proves he did it," she said to herself. She quickly transferred the video file to the pen drive she had found and turned off the camera system. Now she had the final piece she needed, As she left the office, she heard the sound of footsteps in the dining room. Her heart raced. Frank had returned. He was talking on the phone, his voice low but audible. "I said I'm taking care of it. The problem has been neutralized. There's no way this can come back to me." Frank sounded frustrated but self-assured, as if he believed everything was under control. Sarah hid behind the office door, waiting for him to leave the dining room. When she was sure he had gone to the kitchen, she quickly slipped out the back door and ran to the car. Grace looked at her with concern. "Are you okay, Sarah? What happened in there?" the girl asked, clutching the notebook tightly. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "I'm okay, Grace, and I think we found exactly what we needed." She held up the pen drive as if it were a trophy. "Inside here is the proof that Frank is the real culprit. He was recorded putting the poison in the sauce of the dish." Grace's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and excitement taking hold of her. "Then Mom will be free now, right? This will prove everything." Sarah nodded, but kept a cautious tone. "Yes, Grace, this is what we need to save your mom, but we need to do this the right way. We'll organize everything and hand this over directly to the judge. We can't give Frank a chance to destroy this evidence." On the way back home, Sarah explained to Grace how the video would be the definitive piece to free Amy. "You're going to be very important, Grace. When we show this, you'll talk about your mom, about what she means to you. It will be your chance to help tell the truth." Upon arriving home, Sarah connected the pen drive to the computer and watched the video again, ensuring the file was intact. She also made copies on other devices, in case anything happened to the main pen drive. As she did this, Grace sat beside her, observing everything intently. "Sarah, I think Mom will be really proud of you." "And so am I," Grace said with a small smile. Sarah paused for a moment, moved by the girl's words. "Thank you, Grace, but your courage is what's going to save your mom. Together, we'll make it." That night, while Grace slept, Sarah continued to review the material and plan the next steps. Now, with the video in hand, she felt they were finally close to freeing Amy, but she also knew Frank would do anything to protect himself. The final challenge was just beginning. In the living room, the lights were off except for the soft glow of the computer screen on the table. Sarah and Grace were sitting side by side, their eyes fixed on the video that was now the most important piece to save Amy. The recording clearly showed Frank Carter tampering with the victim's dish, the vial of poison in his hand. Sarah paused the video at the exact moment when the incriminating act was evident. "Grace, this is enough. There's no way anyone can watch this and believe your mom did anything wrong," Sarah said, trying to stay calm, but her voice carried a tone of relief mixed with urgency. Grace looked at the video, then at Sarah, clutching her sketchbook tightly. "So they'll believe Mom? This will make her come home?" the girl asked, her eyes brimming with hope. Sarah nodded, but she knew the path wouldn't be so simple. "Yes, Grace, but we need to make sure the right people see this. And it's not enough to just show the evidence. They need to understand what's at stake, who your mom really is, and no one can do that better than you." Grace blinked, surprised, looking at Sarah with a mixture of fear and determination. "Me? But what can I do? Will they listen to a child?" Sarah leaned in to be at the girl's level, gently holding her hands. "Grace, you are the most important person in this story. You know your mom better than anyone. When you speak about her, about what she means to you, people will listen. And when they see the video and the evidence, they won't be able to deny the truth. It's your love for your mom that will make the difference." Grace remained silent for a moment, processing Sarah's words. She looked at the sketchbook, slowly flipping through the pages until she reached the drawing of Amy as a superhero. "I want to help. If this can bring my mom back, I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice still trembling but filled with courage. Sarah smiled, moved by the little girl's determination. "You're amazing, Grace. Your mom would be so proud of you. Let's rehearse everything properly. When the time comes, you'll speak from the heart, and I'll be by your side the whole time." The two spent the rest of the night preparing Grace for the crucial moment. Sarah showed the video several times, explaining every detail, while Grace took notes in her notebook about what she wanted to say about her mom. "I'm going to talk about how she teaches me to be brave, about how she always works hard for me, and that she would never do anything to hurt anyone," Grace said with tears in her eyes. When they finished, Sarah hugged the girl tightly. "You're going to change everything, Grace. Your courage will save your mother." At that moment, they both knew they were ready to face the next step, to face the court where the death penalty would be reviewed. The sun was high in the sky, but for Sarah and Grace, the days seemed plunged in tension and urgency. They had left home early, carrying in their hands the only hope they had, the evidence that could save Amy. The court, where Amy's death sentence review was taking place, was an imposing structure with tall columns and heavy doors that seemed to reflect the weight of the decisions made there. Sarah parked the car in a hurry and looked at Grace in the back seat. "Grace, are you ready?" Sarah asked, her voice firm but gentle. The girl was holding the sketchbook with one hand and clutching the pen drive in the other. Her eyes were watery, but she nodded with determination. "I'm ready, Sarah. It's for Mommy. I can do this." Sarah opened the car door and helped Grace get out. They ran towards the courthouse entrance, feeling time running out. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the stone steps as Sarah glanced anxiously at her watch. The review hearing was the last chance to overturn Amy's death sentence, and any delay could jeopardize Grace's mother's future. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was somber. Judge Henderson, with his stern expression and imposing demeanor, presided over the case. Amy's defense attorney looked exhausted, while the prosecutor exuded confidence as if victory was already assured. Amy, seated in the defendant's chair, was pale, but her eyes shone with a mixture of despair and hope. She knew this was the decisive moment. Sarah and Grace passed through the courthouse security and entered the hallway leading to the courtroom. Grace squeezed Sarah's hand tightly. "They will listen to us, won't they?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Sarah knelt down to be at eye level with her and held her shoulders. "They will, Grace. You are your mother's voice now. Trust yourself and speak from the heart. I'll be by your side." They opened the courtroom door, momentarily interrupting the solemn silence. All eyes turned towards them. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Who are these people and why are they interrupting the proceedings?" he asked in a firm tone. Sarah stepped forward with Grace by her side. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but we have evidence that is crucial to this case. Evidence that was not presented before and that could change everything," she said, her voice steady but respectful. The prosecutor rolled his eyes, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We are in the final stage of the trial. These interruptions only serve to delay the process." The judge looked at Sarah and Grace for a moment before responding. "If the evidence is relevant and can be verified, I will allow it to be presented. But I ask that you be quick and direct." Amy, seeing Sarah and Grace, felt a wave of hope surge through her body. She tried to hold back her tears as she saw her daughter there, so small yet so brave, clutching the sketchbook like a shield. Sarah led Grace to the front of the courtroom. The girl was nervous, but remained steadfast by Sarah's side. "Grace has something to say about her mother. Something this court needs to hear," Sarah announced, looking directly at the judge. The moment was charged with tension. Amy's fate seemed to rest upon Grace's small figure as she took a deep breath, gripped the sketchbook tightly and prepared to speak. The silence in the courtroom was almost palpable. All eyes were on Grace, standing beside Sarah, holding her sketchbook in her small but steady hands. The girl took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the weight of all expectations and hopes upon her shoulders. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident, "this is Grace Wilson, daughter of Amy Wilson. She has brought something this court needs to see, something that can prove Amy is not guilty." She placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder, encouraging her to continue. Grace looked at the judge, her eyes shining with emotion. "Your Honor, I know my mother didn't do anything wrong. She would never hurt anyone. All she ever wanted was to take care of me and work hard, but now she's in jail for something she didn't do, and I want to show the truth." Judge Henderson looked at Grace with a mix of surprise and compassion. He gestured with his hand, signaling for the girl to continue. "Very well, dear, show us what you have brought." Grace opened her sketchbook, revealing an illustration of her mother smiling, holding a tray of food at the restaurant. Underneath, in large letters, it said, "My mum is a hero." She placed the drawing on the judge's bench and handed over the pen drive with her other hand. "This video shows who the real culprit is. Please watch it." The prosecutor immediately objected, his voice full of disbelief. "Your Honor, this is completely irregular. A child presenting evidence? We have no way of knowing if this material is legitimate or fabricated." Sarah did not hesitate and stepped forward, directly confronting the prosecutor. "This evidence was obtained directly from Frank Carter's office, the owner of the restaurant, and I have documents to support what is on the video. The debts, the threats, and even the receipt for the purchase of the poison. Everything points to him." The prosecutor tried to maintain his composure, but the impact of Sarah's words and Grace's presence had shaken his confidence. The judge looked at both of them and then turned to a court technician. "Bring a computer, let's see what's on this flash drive." As the technician hurried to connect the device, Sarah turned to Frank, who was sitting in the area reserved for witnesses. He had remained silent until that moment, but now seemed restless, his eyes avoiding Sarah's. "Frank," Sarah began, her voice laden with indignation, "you knew what you were doing from the start. You knew Amy was innocent, but you used her to cover up your own lies. You put her life and Grace's in danger to protect yourself. How could you have the courage?" Frank tried to maintain his composure, but his expression betrayed him. He slowly rose, adjusting the collar of his shirt, as if trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. You have nothing on me. I run a restaurant. It's impossible for me to have done something like that." "Impossible?" Sarah retorted, taking a step towards him. "Then why were you so nervous after the incident happened? Why did we find documents proving you owed money to the man who died? Why is there a receipt for the purchase of poison with your name on it?" Frank was silent for a moment, but before he could respond, the court technician announced, "The video is ready to be played." All eyes turned to the screen. The recording began, showing the activity in the restaurant's kitchen on the day of the incident. Frank was seen entering and exiting, rummaging through drawers, and finally picking up a small vial. He poured the contents into the sauce, quickly stirred it and left with the plate. The silence in the room was broken by murmurs of shock. The judge looked from the video to Frank. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say about what we just witnessed?" he asked, his voice stern. Frank began to stutter. This doesn't prove anything. It doesn't show who served the plate. I'm not guilty of what happened." He looked around the room as if searching for an exit, but Sarah's gaze was an impenetrable wall. "Don't try to wriggle out of this, Frank," Sarah said, pointing at him. "You knew James Morgan was a threat to you. He knew about your debts and your lies, and you decided to silence him. You manipulated everything to pin the blame on Amy, a woman who just wanted to do her job and take care of her daughter." Grace, who was standing beside Sarah, raised her voice for the first time since the video had been played. "You hurt my mom, and now everyone knows what you did. You can't lie anymore." Grace's words echoed through the courtroom, carrying an emotional weight no one had expected. Frank tried to respond, but the evidence was overwhelming. He sank back into his chair, his face pale and his hands trembling. The judge sighed deeply before speaking. "We will continue to examine the evidence presented. This court needs further clarification, but what we've seen here today changes everything." He struck his gavel, temporarily adjourning the session as the audience continued to murmur in shock. Sarah knelt beside Grace, hugging her tightly. "You were amazing, Grace. Your mom is going to be so proud of you." The girl smiled, feeling she had taken a crucial step towards saving her mother. The judge declared the session suspended until the new evidence was officially analyzed. Sarah crouched down beside Grace, hugging her. "You did it, Grace. You opened the door to the truth. Now it's just a matter of time before everything is resolved." Grace smiled, for the first time in days, feeling that she had taken a crucial step towards bringing her mother back home. The courtroom was immersed in a dense tension. The technician had prepared the video to be played, and all eyes were fixed on the screen positioned beside the judge's bench. The silence was interrupted only by the sound of Judge Henderson's footsteps as he adjusted himself in his chair, preparing to watch the footage that could decide Amy Wilson's fate. "We will now display the contents of the pen drive submitted as evidence," the judge announced, signaling for the technician to start the video. Sarah held Grace's hand firmly, and Amy, seated in the area reserved for defendants, stared fixedly at the screen. She knew this was the moment that could change everything. The video began with a recording of the restaurant's kitchen. It was a clear footage, showing the environment where the victim's dish had been prepared. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Employees came and went, busy with their tasks. But then Frank Carter appeared on the scene. He was alone, looking around suspiciously before opening a drawer and taking out a small vial. On the screen, Frank held the vial in his hands, hesitant for a moment. Then he poured the contents into the sauce being prepared, quickly stirring it before leaving the kitchen with the dish in his hands. Murmurs of shock echoed through the courtroom, but the video didn't end there. The next part of the video was recorded by a camera in Frank's office, apparently installed for internal monitoring. In the recording, Frank was on the phone, visibly nervous. His voice was loud enough to be picked up by the system. "I've already dealt with the problem, all right. James won't bother me anymore. He knew too much and I couldn't take the risk. Now I just need to make sure no one finds out." The courtroom fell into complete silence. Frank's words echoed in the room, each one sounding like a sentence against himself. Judge Henderson stopped the video and looked directly at Frank, who was seated in the witness area, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Mr. Carter," the judge began, his voice firm and unwavering, "this court has just watched a video in which you not only tampered with the dish that led to the victim's death, but also admitted, in your own words, to eliminating someone to protect your interests. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Frank opened his mouth, but the words seemed to escape him. He looked around as if seeking support, but the glances he encountered were only of condemnation. This doesn't prove anything," he stammered. I was just speaking figuratively. There's no way to directly link this to James Morgan's death." Sarah stood up, asking the judge for permission to speak. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. This video is not only a confession, but also proof that Frank Carter acted deliberately to incriminate Amy Wilson. He used his position as the restaurant owner to hide his intentions, while placing all the blame on someone who only wanted to do her job." The judge nodded, turning back to Frank. "Mr. Carter, the court must now consider the implications of the evidence presented. Given the content of this video, the actions to review Mrs. Amy Wilson's sentence are justified. Your position, however, is clearly compromised." Grace, who had remained silent until then, looked directly at Frank. "You hurt my mother to save yourself," she said, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "Now, everyone knows what you did." Frank lowered his head, unable to respond. The weight of the truth was finally coming to light, and for the first time it seemed that Amy had a real chance at justice. The courtroom was in complete silence after the video was played. Everyone was still digesting Frank Carter's confession, captured by the camera in his office. Judge Henderson, with his stern expression, paused before continuing. He looked at the prosecution, then at the defense, and finally at Frank, who now seemed like a defeated man. "Mr. Carter," said the judge, adjusting his glasses, "this court needs to clearly understand the context of the actions shown in the video. The evidence presented indicates that your actions were premeditated. Is there anything else you would like to add before we continue to analyze the documents?" Frank, his face pale and hands trembling, stuttered before trying to defend himself. I was desperate. This isn't what it seems. I just wanted to sort things out." His voice was weak, lacking the confidence he used to display. Before he could continue, Sarah stood up, asking permission to speak. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to present further information that explains the motive behind Frank Carter's actions. These documents provide the context he conveniently tried to hide." The judge gave an approving gesture, and Sarah handed the papers over to the court's technical team. They were copies of casino receipts, promissory notes, and collection letters that Sarah had found in Frank's office. As the judge examined the documents, Sarah explained, "These receipts show that Frank Carter accumulated a debt of $50,000 at a casino. He was involved in gambling, and it seems lost more than he could pay. The promissory notes indicate that he was being pressured by James Morgan, the man who was poisoned. The handwritten threats on the documents confirm that Morgan knew about the debts and was willing to expose Frank if he wasn't paid." The prosecution tried to intervene. "Your Honor, how can we be sure that these documents are legitimate and not fabricated to divert attention from the defendant?" The judge, impassive, responded firmly. The documents will be verified, but considering the confession on the video and the coherence between the evidence presented, there are clear indications that there is more to this case than was initially judged. Sarah continued. Your Honor, the video shows Frank admitting that he needed to silence James Morgan. His gambling debts had put him in a vulnerable position. He knew that if Morgan exposed his debts, his reputation would be ruined, and he could even lose the restaurant. So, instead of facing his responsibilities, he chose to eliminate him and frame Amy Wilson as a scapegoat. Frank abruptly stood up, trying to regain control. That's a lie. I had no choice. Morgan was threatening me, pressuring me. He said he was going to destroy me if I didn't pay up. I just wanted to protect what was mine. His voice was a mixture of anger and desperation, but every word only strengthened the case against him. Amy's defense attorney seized the opportunity to interject. Your Honor, Mr. Carter's own words only reinforce what has already been presented. He has admitted the motive behind the murder and confirmed that Morgan was pressing him over debts. Mrs. Wilson was falsely incriminated for a crime she did not commit. The judge turned his attention back to the documents. One of the papers caught his eye. A handwritten letter from James Morgan, dated just days before his death. In the letter, Morgan demanded Frank pay what he owed and threatened to reveal his casino activities. At the end of the letter, one sentence stood out in capital letters. If I don't get my money by the end of the week, everyone will know who you really are. The judge read the letter aloud, causing every word to echo throughout the courtroom. The audience murmured, while Amy, still seated in the defendant's box, looked at Sarah and Grace with tears in her eyes. For the first time, she felt the truth was finally coming to light. Grace, who had remained silent until now, raised her voice. He hurt the man and blamed my mom because he was scared, she said, pointing at Frank. He just wanted to save himself. The young girl's words, so simple and direct, hit Frank like a blow. He sat back down, running his hands over his face, unable to withstand the weight of the evidence. The prosecutor, once confident, was now visibly flustered. Judge Henderson sighed deeply, placing the papers on the bench. This court is beginning to see the extent of Mr. Carter's actions. The connection between the debts, James Morgan's threats, and the poisoning is evident. Mrs. Amy Wilson was wrongfully convicted, and these new pieces of evidence deserve thorough review before any final ruling. Sarah hugged Grace, who now displayed a small, relieved smile. The truth was finally emerging, and Frank Carter, the true culprit, was becoming increasingly cornered. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of the judge shuffling through the documents and examining the newly presented evidence. The weight of the evidence against Frank Carter was undeniable. The video, the documents about his gambling debts and James Morgan's threats had exposed the truth. But as everyone was focused on the trial, Frank, seated in the witness area, began to fidget restlessly. Sarah noticed his behavior immediately. Frank looked around, as if calculating the best way to get out of there. His eyes darted from the judge's bench to the entrance door, and his hands gripped the back of the chair nervously. Something about his posture screamed panic. Judge Henderson adjusted his glasses and announced, "This court will temporarily recess so that the new evidence can be thoroughly verified. I ask that everyone present remain until the trial resumes." He banged his gavel and began organizing the documents with his staff. It was at that moment that Frank saw his opportunity. As soon as the judge rose, he quickly grabbed his briefcase and stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, Your Honor, I just need to step out for a moment," he stammered, hurriedly making his way towards the exit. Sarah immediately stood up. "He's trying to flee," she shouted, pointing at Frank. Everyone in the courtroom turned towards him, but Frank was already hastily opening the door. Two court officers stationed near the entrance tried to block him, but he shoved them forcefully and began running down the hallway. "Get him!" Amy's defense attorney shouted as the officers took off in pursuit of Frank. Sarah grabbed Grace's hand and stood beside Amy, who watched everything unfold with a shocked expression. "He knows he's finished," Sarah said, more to herself than anyone else. Frank ran through the courthouse hallways, dodging staff and visitors. His breathing was heavy, and he looked back frantically as the officers closed in. When he reached the main exit, he pushed the doors open forcefully, only to come face to face with two police officers stationed outside. They had been alerted by the radio system and were ready to intercept him. "Mr. Carter, stop right there!" one of the officers shouted, hand on his holster. But Frank, driven by desperation, tried to run in the opposite direction. Before he could take more than a few steps, the officers and court officers caught up to him and wrestled him to the ground. Frank screamed as he was handcuffed, "This is a mistake! You can't do this to me! I'm innocent!" But his words were hollow and everyone knew it. The weight of the evidence had already sealed his fate. The officers hauled him to his feet and walked him back into the courthouse. The judge, who had returned to the courtroom, looked at Frank with disdain. "Mr. Carter, your attempted flight only reinforces your guilt. This court will consider your actions in any final ruling." Sarah, Grace, and Amy watched as Frank was escorted out of the courtroom. Sarah knelt down beside Grace and whispered, "You did it, Grace. The truth is finally winning." The court was back in session after Frank Carter's failed escape attempt. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, but charged with anticipation. All the evidence had been organized, and Judge Henderson prepared to hear the final arguments based on the evidence presented. Frank, now handcuffed and seated under the supervision of two officers, avoided looking at anyone, especially Amy. The judge adjusted his glasses and began. After reviewing the evidence presented in this hearing, including the video recorded in Mr. Carter's kitchen and office, as well as the documents relating to his gambling debts and the threats received, this court will now seek to definitively clarify the circumstances that led to Amy Wilson's conviction. He paused, staring at Frank. The evidence indicates that there was a deliberate attempt to frame the defendant. Sarah, seated next to Grace, squeezed the girl's hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Amy's defense attorney stood up and asked to speak. "Your Honor, I would like to present a summary of the evidence that corroborates that my client, Amy Wilson, was the victim of a carefully planned setup by Mr. Carter." The judge nodded, allowing the attorney to continue. The attorney took a step forward and began. "First, we have the video showing Frank Carter tampering with the dish that led to James Morgan's death. In the video, he is seen pouring a substance into the sauce, which was later served to the victim. This contradicts any claim that Mrs. Wilson was directly involved in the crime." The attorney paused before continuing. "Second, the documents presented by Sarah Mitchell, which include receipts for gambling debts and collection letters sent by James Morgan to Mr. Carter, indicate a clear motive for the crime. Frank Carter was under intense financial pressure and feared for his own safety if he did not pay his debts." Sarah looked at Amy, who still seemed to be absorbing the fact that, for the first time, the truth was being officially acknowledged. The attorney continued. "Furthermore, we have the receipt for the purchase of poison registered in Mr. Carter's name, dated just 2 days before the incident. This receipt directly connects Mr. Carter to the method used in the crime." The prosecutor tried to intervene, but his words sounded feeble. "Your Honor, even if this evidence is compelling, we need to examine whether there was negligence on Mrs. Wilson's part, considering her presence in the kitchen at the time in question." Sarah immediately asked for permission to speak. "Your Honor, Amy Wilson was doing her job. Frank Carter used the position of trust he had as the restaurant owner to frame her. He manipulated the crime scene and ensured that all suspicion fell on her while hiding his own motives." The judge gestured for Sarah to continue. "And there's more," she said, picking up a copy of one of the documents. "Frank Carter had control over the restaurant's cameras. He could have deleted the recordings, but he probably never thought they would be used against him. The video is irrefutable proof that Amy was wrongfully framed." Amy, who until then had remained silent, raised her voice for the first time. "Your Honor, all I did was work to support my daughter. I would never hurt anyone. I was used as a pawn, while he got rid of his own responsibilities." The judge looked at Amy, then at the prosecutor, and finally at Frank. "The evidence is clear. This court recognizes that there is more than sufficient reason to question Mrs. Wilson's conviction. Mr. Carter's actions, as shown by the evidence, reveal a deliberate scheme to cover up his own crimes." Frank lowered his head, unable to sustain the condemning looks around him. The courtroom seemed to breathe collectively as the judge announced, "The court will continue a detailed review of the evidence before rendering a final decision. But for now, the evidence indicates that Ms. Amy Wilson was the victim of a grave injustice." Sarah hugged Grace tightly, while Amy looked at them both with tears in her eyes. The truth was finally emerging, bringing with it a glimmer of hope for all. The courtroom was enveloped in a heavy silence. Judge Henderson had asked Frank Carter to explain his position in the face of the overwhelming evidence presented. Frank was visibly dejected. The weight of the evidence and the failed attempt to flee had broken the facade of control he had maintained until then. Frank looked around, seeing the faces that stared at him with disdain and disbelief. He wiped his sweaty forehead with a trembling hand and finally raised his head, trying to gather what little dignity he had left. I need to tell the truth," he began, his voice weak and hesitant. "There's no point in hiding anymore." The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly. "Very well, Mr. Carter. This court is listening. Keep in mind that anything you say can and will be used against you in subsequent legal proceedings." Frank took a deep breath, looking at the floor. "I didn't plan for everything to get so out of control," he said, his voice laden with guilt. "James Morgan was dangerous. He knew too much about me, and I was cornered. He knew about my debts and was threatening to expose everything if I didn't pay. I tried to negotiate, tried to buy time, but he didn't give me a choice." Frank raised his gaze, looking at the judge and then Amy. "I owed $50,000 to a casino. I lost it all in one unlucky night trying to recover what I had already lost. Before I knew it, I was drowning in debt, and the casino started pressuring me. James was a middleman, someone who worked for them. He knew everything and started threatening me directly." Amy's defense attorney interrupted. "And that's why you decided to eliminate him? To avoid him exposing your debts and ruining your reputation?" Frank nodded, unable to sustain the attorney's gaze. "Yes, I knew that if he talked, I'd lose the restaurant, my family, everything I had built. He said that if I didn't pay within a week, he'd tell everything, even to my employees. I was desperate." Grace, sitting next to Sarah, watched Frank with a mixture of confusion and anger. The girl held the sketchbook tightly, as if it were her anchor amidst the chaos. Frank noticed her gaze and looked away, unable to face the child he had harmed by incriminating her mother. "Continue, Mr. Carter," said the judge firmly. "How exactly did you decide that incriminating Amy Wilson was your best way out?" Frank closed his eyes as if he wanted to escape the shame. "It was an impulse," he admitted, almost in a whisper. "That night I knew James would be at the restaurant. He used to frequent it to pressure me, to make sure I didn't run away from my debts. I had bought the poison days before, but I didn't know if I would really have the courage to use it. When I saw he was there, something inside me broke." Frank paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I went to the kitchen, prepared the dish, and mixed the poison into the sauce. Then I served the dish as if it was something normal. I knew Amy was working that night, and that she was the perfect person to blame. She was dedicated, never caused problems. No one would believe she was capable of doing something so terrible. And in the end, that's exactly what happened." Hearing Frank's words, Amy felt a wave of indignation and relief at the same time. Indignation for everything he had done, but relief because finally, the truth was coming out. "You destroyed my life and my daughter's to save yours," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "You used my trust, my dedication, as a weapon against me." Frank couldn't respond. He lowered his head, his hands still trembling. "I don't know what to say. I was desperate, but that doesn't justify what I did. I know I deserve to pay for it." The prosecutor, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Your Honor, the defendant has just admitted in a court of law not only the premeditated murder of James Morgan, but also the intentional manipulation of circumstances to incriminate another person. This is a clear case of aggravated guilt." Judge Henderson nodded. "Yes, prosecutor. Mr. Carter's words are clear and will be recorded as a formal confession. Mr. Carter, are you aware of the legal consequences of what you have just admitted?" Frank shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "I am, Your Honor. I just wanted this to end." The judge paused before speaking again. "Very well. This court will review all the evidence and determine the next steps to overturn Mrs. Amy Wilson's sentence and hold Mr. Frank Carter accountable for his crimes. The session will be temporarily suspended for formalization." Sarah held Grace's hand as they both looked at Amy, who was now silently crying. Frank's confession was the final piece missing to destroy the false accusation against her. Grace, with a small smile of hope, said softly to Sarah, "I knew my mum was innocent." The court had reconvened after a brief recess for final review of the evidence and Frank Carter's confession. Everyone anxiously awaited Judge Henderson's decision, who returned to court with a serious and resolute expression. Amy was sitting in the defendant's area, trying to remain calm, while Sarah and Grace held each other's hands in the gallery. Judge Henderson adjusted his glasses and banged the gavel to bring order to the courtroom. After reviewing the evidence presented, including the video, the financial documents, witness statements, and above all, the direct confession of Mr. Frank Carter, this court has concluded that Mrs. Amy Wilson was wrongfully convicted. The evidence clearly demonstrates that she was not involved in the crime she was accused of. Amy brought her hands to her mouth, unable to contain her tears. She looked at Sarah and Grace, who smiled back at her, emotional. Grace clutched the sketchbook to her chest as if hugging her mother. The judge continued, "Therefore, I order that Mrs. Amy Wilson's death sentence be immediately overturned. This court issues her release order with immediate effect. Mrs. Wilson will be formally exonerated from all charges. As for Mr. Frank Carter, he will face criminal charges for premeditated murder, evidence tampering, and deliberate incrimination of an innocent person." Frank, still handcuffed and escorted by officers, lowered his head. He knew his defeat was inevitable. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as the public absorbed the magnitude of the moment. Amy stood up slowly, as if she was still trying to believe what she had just heard. The defense attorney approached her and said, "You're free, Amy." The truth has finally prevailed. She nodded, unable to find words to express the relief and gratitude she felt at that moment. Grace couldn't wait. She let go of Sarah's hand and ran towards her mother, ignoring the stares of everyone in the courtroom. "Mom!" the girl cried, throwing herself into Amy's arms. The two hugged each other tightly, crying together. "I knew you didn't do anything wrong. I knew you would come back to me," Grace said, her voice choked up. Amy stroked her daughter's face, wiping away the girl's tears. "I'm here now, my love, and I'll never let anyone separate us again." Sarah approached slowly, giving space for the reunion between mother and daughter, but Amy looked at her with gratitude. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life. You believed in me when no one else did." Sarah smiled, holding Amy's hand. "You don't have to thank me. It was the truth that saved you, and your daughter is the bravest person I've ever met." The judge adjourned the session, but the impact of his words would echo for a long time. The courtroom emptied slowly as Amy, Sarah, and Grace exited together, ready to start anew. For the first time in a long while, Amy felt the weight of injustice dissipate, replaced by the promise of a better future. The metallic door to the cell creaked open, and the hallway light poured into the cold, cramped space where Amy had spent months. She was sitting on the small bunk, hands clasped, trying to control the mixture of anxiety and disbelief. The officer who opened the door stepped forward and called her name firmly, but with a slight smile on her face. "Ms. Amy Wilson, it's time. You're free." Amy raised her gaze, as if she had difficulty believing what she had heard. She stood up slowly, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment she had prayed for, dreamed of, and waited for throughout that nightmare. The words echoed in her mind, but still seemed unreal. I can really go?" she asked, her voice faltering as her eyes sought some confirmation on the officer's face. "Yes, you can. Your sentence has been overturned, and you are officially free. We'll take care of the final formalities, but your daughter and your friend are waiting for you outside," the officer replied, in a tone that mixed professionalism and empathy. Amy brought her hands to her face, unable to hold back her tears. After so many dark days, a light finally shone at the end of the tunnel. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure, and followed the officer down the hallway. Each step seemed lighter, as if the invisible chains that bound her began to loosen. As she passed through the main gate, Amy saw Sarah and Grace in the distance, waiting with watchful eyes and broad smiles. Grace held the sketchbook against her chest, swaying from side to side, unable to contain her excitement. As soon as Grace's eyes met her mother's, the girl dropped the sketchbook and ran towards her. "Mommy!" Grace shouted, her voice charged with emotion. Amy opened her arms and knelt down, receiving her daughter with an embrace that seemed to carry all the feelings that had been repressed during that period of suffering. "My girl, I missed you so much. I promise we'll never be apart again," said Amy, as tears freely streamed down her face. Sarah, observing the scene up close, approached with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Amy. This victory is yours, and no one can take it away from you." Amy stood up, still holding Grace, and looked at Sarah with gratitude. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Sarah. You believed in me when no one else did. You're the real hero here." Sarah shook her head. "No, Amy, it was you and Grace. You two never gave up on each other. That's what saved you both." As the sun began to set, the three walked together away from that place. Amy felt the cool air on her face, a symbol of her newly regained freedom. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to smile. A new chapter was just beginning. The sun shone softly in the sky, reflecting on the glass of the car where Grace sat anxiously, while Sarah watched the entrance of the penitentiary. The girl held the sketchbook in one hand and a small bouquet of flowers in the other. Her feet swung impatiently, and her eyes were fixed on the large metal door that seemed to never open. "Sarah, do you think she'll come out soon?" Grace asked, her voice charged with emotion and a touch of impatience. Sarah smiled and placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Yes, Grace, your mother is coming. They just need to finish the last procedures. She'll be here before you know it." Grace looked at the sketchbook in her hands and opened it to the page where she had drawn her mother as a superhero. "I made this for her. I want her to know that, to me, she's always been a hero, even when no one believed her." Before Sarah could respond, the large metal door began to open, emitting a creak that made Grace's heart race. The girl stood up, her small body trembling with emotion, as her eyes desperately searched for her mother. When she finally saw Amy coming out, Grace dropped the bouquet and ran towards her, tears already streaming down her face. "Mom!" Grace shouted, her voice filled with joy and relief. Amy stopped for a moment, as if she needed to make sure it was real before opening her arms and kneeling on the floor, waiting for her daughter. When Grace reached her, they embraced tightly, as if they never wanted to let go. "Grace, my girl, I missed you so much," said Amy. Her voice choked as she stroked her daughter's hair. "I thought of you every day. You were what kept me strong." Grace sobbed, clinging to her mother's neck. "I knew you were innocent, Mom. I knew you'd come back to me. I did everything I could to help you. Sarah and I found the evidence. I knew it would save you." Amy pulled back slightly to look into her daughter's eyes. She wiped the tears from Grace's face and held her little face in her hands. "You did more than that, Grace. You saved my life. You're the bravest and most amazing girl I've ever known. I'm so proud of you." Sarah approached slowly, watching the scene with teary eyes. "Amy, it was Grace's strength that brought us here. She never gave up on you, not for a second." Amy stood up, still holding Grace's hand, and looked at Sarah. "And you, Sarah. I don't know how to thank you. You were a friend, a sister, and the only person who believed in me when everything seemed lost. I don't know how I would have survived without you." Sarah smiled and hugged them both, her words filled with emotion. "You don't need to thank me, Amy. I knew you were innocent, but it was the love you and Grace have for each other that gave us the strength to fight to the end." As they walked together to the car, Amy looked at Grace, who was now smiling as she held her mother's hand tightly. For the first time in months, Amy felt she could breathe. The nightmare was over, and the love between her and her daughter had won. The sky was already tinged with the orange hues of dusk when Sarah arrived at Amy's small house, now filled with life and joy. The table in the dining room was covered with simple dishes, but prepared with love, and Grace's laughter echoed through the space as she showed her drawings to her mother. The aroma of fresh food mingled with the feeling of relief and victory that hung in the air. Sarah entered through the door with a discreet smile, observing the scene from afar. Amy noticed her presence and immediately went up to her, extending her arms for a tight hug. "Sarah, you need to know how much this means to me. I wouldn't be here now if it weren't for you." Sarah returned the embrace, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. "Amy, all I did was support you. The real miracle was the strength you and Grace showed. You two are amazing." Grace ran up to Sarah and pulled her by the hand, leading her to the table. "Sarah, you have to sit and eat with us. Mom made your favorite dish," said the girl, her eyes shining with happiness. Sarah laughed, sitting down next to Grace while Amy served the food. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with shared memories, stories, and promises for the future. Every word spoken was a silent celebration of the end of a nightmare that had bound these three people so deeply. After a while, Amy raised her glass, calling everyone's attention. "I just want to say that this moment is more than a celebration of my freedom. It's a celebration of the friendship and family we found amidst the darkness. Sarah, you're part of our family now. And Grace, you're my reason for everything." Grace raised her juice glass, laughing with the pure joy of a child who felt the weight of the world finally lifted. Sarah blinked back a few discreet tears, touched by the sincerity of that moment. "You're my family too," Sarah replied, her voice laden with emotion. She held Amy's hand firmly as if wanting to reinforce what she had just said. "And I'll always be here, no matter what happens. Family is about being together, facing everything like we did until now." Amy smiled, squeezing Sarah's hand with gratitude. "You brought us light when everything seemed lost. That will never be forgotten." As the clock on the wall ticked away the hours with its soft ticking, Grace fell asleep on the couch, hugging her sketchbook. Sarah and Amy continued their quiet conversation at the table, the room illuminated by the soft candlelight. Plans for starting over flowed between them, but more than that, they shared renewed dreams and hopes. The battle had been won, but what really mattered was the unbreakable bond that love, friendship, and truth had created between them. The courtroom was packed, and the silence in the room was almost suffocating. Everyone waited anxiously for the verdict that would be announced. Frank Carter, handcuffed and seated next to his lawyers, kept his head down, his face marked by weariness and defeat. He knew the truth had come out, and there were no more excuses or lies to protect him. Judge Henderson adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Frank before beginning his sentence. "After examining all the evidence presented, including the video showing your deliberate actions, the documents proving your gambling debts, the threats made by the victim, and most importantly, your own confession in this court, this jury and I have reached a verdict." The silence in the room grew even heavier as everyone awaited the judge's next words. "Mr. Frank Carter, you have been found guilty of premeditated murder, tampering with evidence and manipulating witnesses with the intent of incriminating the innocent Mrs. Amy Wilson." Frank lifted his head for a moment, but his eyes showed no remorse, only resignation. He knew his attempted escape and his desperate confession had sealed his fate. The judge continued, "Your conduct not only resulted in the death of James Morgan, but also caused indescribable suffering to Mrs. Wilson and her daughter. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, I order that Mr. Frank Carter be held liable for moral and financial damages to the victims directly harmed by his actions." A murmur ran through the room. Amy, seated in the gallery next to Sarah and Grace, felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was as if a huge weight was finally being lifted from her shoulders. She looked at Grace, who was tightly holding her hand, smiling slightly. "It's over, Mom. He'll never hurt us again," Grace whispered. Judge Henderson banged his gavel, adjourning the session. Before being led away, Frank looked at Amy one last time. I can't change what I did. I'm sorry," he said, but his words rang hollow. Amy didn't respond. She just took a deep breath and looked away. Frank was escorted out of the courtroom by 2 officers as people began to rise and leave the court. Sarah placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. "Justice has been served. Now you can start over." Amy nodded, holding Grace's hand. "Yes, and this time without fear." As they left the courthouse, the sun shone brightly in the sky, symbolizing a new beginning for Amy and her daughter. The aroma of bread baking in the oven filled Amy's small kitchen, bringing a sense of coziness and renewal. For the first time in months, the space felt alive again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the simple yet welcoming setting, where Grace and Amy worked together to prepare dinner. The table was covered with sketchbooks, fresh flowers, and new plans for the future. "It's almost ready, Mom," Grace asked, with a smile that seemed bigger than ever. She stirred the salad bowl with enthusiasm, savoring the pleasure of being by her mother's side again. Amy looked at her daughter and smiled. "Almost, my love. And you're getting really good in the kitchen. I think I might lose my place as the house chef soon." Grace laughed, brimming with pride. I just learned from the best. Sarah entered the kitchen carrying a small toolbox. Done, I fixed the living room lamp. You don't have to worry about walking in the dark at night anymore. She set the toolbox down and approached the table, observing the two of them. This place looks so different now. It feels full of life. Amy turned to Sarah, wiping her hands on a cloth. And it's thanks to you, Sarah. You brought life back to me and Grace. I don't know how I'll repay everything you've done. Sarah shook her head, smiling. Amy, you don't need to thank me. Seeing you and Grace together happy is enough. That's worth more than anything. Amy sighed and looked around. The house, which once seemed like an empty and sad place, was now becoming a home again. Every corner seemed to breathe hope and love. She put her arms around Grace, holding her close. This is our new chance, Grace, and I promise we'll make the most of every moment. Later, during dinner, they talked about the future. Amy revealed her plans to open a small bakery with Sarah's help. It has always been my dream, but I never thought it could become a reality. Now I want to create something that's ours, a place where we can start over. Grace, her eyes shining, exclaimed, I can design the sign, Mum. It will be the most beautiful sign in the city. Sarah, who was savoring a slice of fresh bread, gave an approving smile. And I'll help with promotion. Everyone will know that this bakery is a symbol of overcoming. The night was filled with laughter, plans, and dreams. For the first time in a long time, Amy felt she could look to the future with optimism. Although the scars of the past were still present, they no longer defined her life. She had her daughter, her friend, and a renewed purpose. As she put Grace to bed, Amy sat beside her and held her hand. Thank you for never giving up on me, my girl. You're the reason I'm here today. Grace smiled sleepily and replied in a low voice, You've always been the best mom in the world. Now we can be truly happy. Amy kissed her daughter's forehead and turned off the light, leaving the room with a light heart. She knew the path would be long, but she was ready to face everything with courage and determination. For the first time, she felt she had everything she really needed: love, hope, and the chance to start over. The sun had set, and Amy's little house was enveloped in a peaceful silence. In the living room, soft lights illuminated the faces of Amy, Grace, and Sarah, who were sitting together on the couch. On the coffee table, a small lit candle stood beside Grace's sketchbook, symbolizing a new beginning. Amy held a cup of tea in her hands, looking at her daughter, who was lying with her head in her lap. Grace had fallen asleep, her face serene, holding her mother's hand as if afraid she might disappear. Amy smiled and ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, feeling a wave of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She can finally rest, Sarah commented, sitting beside them. And so can you, Amy. It's all over. Amy nodded, her eyes watering. I still catch myself thinking about everything that happened, all that I lost, but also what I gained. It's strange, you know. Even in the hardest moments, her love was what kept me going. Sarah placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. You faced something that many people wouldn't be able to handle. And you know what? You never lost what was most important. You and Grace never let the bond between you break. Amy sighed, setting her cup on the table. I think the biggest lesson from all this is that the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how hard they try to hide it. And now, all I want is to ensure that Grace has a life filled with love and security. Sarah smiled, looking at Grace's sketchbook. And you will. You've been through the worst. Now it's time to build something new, something just for you two. Amy looked at Sarah, her eyes full of gratitude, as the comfortable silence of the night enveloped the room. The warm lights cast soft shadows on the walls, highlighting the few pictures Amy kept in the house, each one symbolizing simple but meaningful moments. The candle on the table flickered gently, casting a soft glow on Grace's sketchbook, which was open to a page with drawings of flowers and a big smiling sun. I don't know how I would have done this without you, Sarah, Amy said. Her voice choked as she watched her friend. You're more than a friend. You're part of our family. She held Sarah's hand as if she wanted to convey everything that words couldn't express. Sarah smiled, but couldn't hold back the tear that rolled down her face. She quickly wiped it away with the tip of her fingers, trying to maintain her composure. Family isn't just who you're born with, Amy. It's who stands by your side when everything seems impossible. Who holds your hand and doesn't let go even when the ground disappears from under your feet. Amy nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. The old clock on the wall made a faint ticking sound, marking the arrival of a new day. "You held my hand when no one else believed in me," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion. "You gave hope to me and Grace. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay that." Sarah squeezed Amy's hand, looking her directly in the eye. "You already have, Amy. You showed us what courage means, and now it's time to start over. Without fear, without resentment, just love." As Grace murmured softly in her sleep, Amy felt that the past had finally been left behind. For the first time, the future seemed bright, and she knew that together they were ready to embrace it. If the story of Amy Wilson and Grace Wilson moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and check out the story that's appearing on the screen now, specially chosen for you. See you soon.